The rain had been falling for hours, washing the city in a cold, gray haze. Ethan Hayes drove through the empty streets with the wipers beating a slow rhythm against the windshield. His day had been long, though lately every day felt the same. Wake up, go to work, return home to silence. The house he shared with his husband, Mark, had grown so quiet that even the hum of the refrigerator seemed loud. They still called each other partners, still lived under the same roof. But the laughter and warmth that once filled their home had faded into polite distance. As Ethan turned a corner near the bus station, his headlights caught a figure sitting on the curb. A boy, no, maybe 18 or 19, hunched under a thin hoodie, soaked through by the rain. He had no umbrella, no bag, no place to go. Ethan slowed down without thinking. Something about the image pulled at him. He remembered that kind of loneliness, the kind that didn't ask for help because it had forgotten what help looked like. He rolled down the window. "Hey," he called softly, trying not to startle him. "You okay out here?" The boy looked up, water dripping from his hair. His eyes were sharp but tired. "I'm fine," he said quickly. Ethan hesitated. "It's freezing. I live a few blocks away. You can come warm up, get dry. No strings." The boy studied him for a long second, as if measuring whether he could trust a stranger on a dark street. Then finally he nodded. "Just for a bit," he said quietly. Ethan unlocked the passenger door. The boy climbed in, shivering, arms crossed tightly. The car filled with the faint smell of rain and mud. They drove in silence until Ethan spoke again. "I'm Ethan," he said, trying to sound casual. "Ryan," the boy replied. His voice was soft, like someone who hadn't been listened to in a while. When they reached Ethan's house, he handed Ryan a towel and one of his old sweatshirts. Ryan hesitated before taking it, mumbling a small thanks. His hands were shaking. Ethan warmed up soup in the kitchen while Ryan stood awkwardly near the door, unsure if he was allowed to sit. "Go ahead," Ethan said gently, setting the bowl on the table. "Eat." Ryan ate slowly like someone who didn't want to seem greedy. Between spoonfuls, Ethan asked where he was from. Ryan's shoulders stiffened. "Doesn't matter," he muttered. Then, after a pause, he added, "Home's not really home anymore." Ethan didn't press. But when Ryan lifted his eyes, Ethan caught the flicker of pain there, the kind of hurt that came from someone's words, not from the weather. Later, as Ryan folded the towel neatly and set it aside, Ethan offered the couch. "You can stay tonight," he said. "Just until you figure out where to go next." Ryan shook his head. "You don't even know me," Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I know what it's like to need someone to care, even for one night." Ryan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." After Ryan fell asleep, Ethan sat in the living room chair, listening to the sound of the rain against the window. He should have gone to bed, but something about the boy's presence stirred a quiet ache inside him, a mix of protectiveness and guilt, as if he were rediscovering a part of himself that had been numb for too long. He thought about Mark, still at the office or maybe traveling again. It wasn't anger that filled him, just distance, an invisible wall that had grown year after year. And here, in his living room, was someone who barely knew him, yet somehow reminded him of the version of himself he'd forgotten to be. Kind, present, alive. When dawn arrived, pale light spilling across the floor, Ethan went to check the couch. It was empty. His chest tightened. Had Ryan left without saying anything? But then he saw movement outside the window. Ryan was in the yard, feeding a stray cat with bits of leftover bread. His hair was still damp and his clothes hung loose, but he smiled softly when the animal approached him. Ethan stepped outside. "You didn't have to feed her," he said. Ryan shrugged. "Didn't want her to go hungry." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Guess we both have that problem, trying to save strays." Ryan looked up, meeting his gaze. Maybe the world just needs more people who care. Something about the way he said it, the simple sincerity, made Ethan's throat tighten. For the first time in months, he smiled without forcing it. The rain had stopped, and the sky was turning gold. Ethan realized that what had begun as an act of kindness might turn into something much larger, a lesson, a reminder, maybe even a second chance at feeling again. He didn't know where this path would lead, But as Ryan turned back toward the cat, sunlight warming his face, Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Whatever happened next, this meeting wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of a truth he wasn't yet ready to face. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself rearranging his life around the quiet presence that had entered it. Ryan stayed mostly to himself at first, polite but cautious. He helped wash dishes, swept the floor, and always asked before touching anything. It wasn't the behavior of a guest. It was the behavior of someone used to being unwanted. Ethan noticed the small things, the way Ryan folded the blanket every morning before leaving the couch, the way he always waited for Ethan to eat first, the way his eyes darted toward the door whenever he heard footsteps outside, as if ready to run. One morning, Ethan offered him breakfast and said, "You don't need to keep acting like you owe me something." Ryan looked up from his plate. "You're the first person who's been kind to me without wanting anything back. I don't know how to handle that." The words hit deeper than Ethan expected. He wanted to tell Ryan that kindness shouldn't feel foreign, but he knew from experience that life didn't always make that easy. They began to talk more. At first about small things, the weather, movies, the stray cat that now visited daily. But slowly the conversations grew deeper. Ryan spoke about running away from home, about how his father's disappointment had felt heavier than any rainstorm. He said people like me were an embarrassment, Ryan admitted one evening, his voice barely a whisper. Ethan listened in silence, his heart tightening with each word. "I'm sorry," he said. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Ryan nodded but didn't respond. The look in his eyes was one Ethan recognized. The same hollow look he'd seen in himself after years of trying to fix a relationship that had lost its warmth. Mark noticed the change too. He'd come home late as usual, but when he did, he found Ethan laughing in the kitchen with Ryan. It had been months since Ethan had laughed like that. Soft, genuine, unguarded. That night, Mark didn't say much during dinner. When Ryan went to bed, Mark finally spoke. "He's still here." "He doesn't have anywhere else," Ethan replied calmly. Mark frowned. "You're getting too attached." Ethan's patience cracked. "Attached?" "He's a person, Mark, not a burden." "You barely look at me anymore," Mark said, voice cold. "You talk to him more than you talk to me." Ethan froze. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't deny it. Maybe Mark was right. He had started opening up again, but not to his husband. It wasn't about attraction. It was about being seen, something Ryan managed to do without even trying. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The sound of soft rain returned, steady and unending. He thought about how far apart he and Mark had drifted, two people sharing a home but living separate lives. And in that silence, he thought of Ryan's laughter, his honesty, his gratitude. It wasn't love in a romantic sense, but it was something purer, connection. The next morning, Ethan found Ryan on the porch sketching with a pencil he'd found. His hands were smudged with graphite, his focus absolute. On the paper was a drawing of the stray cat, curled up near the window. "You draw really well," Ethan said, stepping closer. Ryan smiled shyly. "It's just something I do when I'm trying not to think too much." Ethan watched as sunlight filtered through the leaves and painted soft shadows across Ryan's face. "You should keep doing it," he said. "It suits you." Ryan looked up at him, eyes bright. "Maybe if someone believed in me earlier, I wouldn't have given up." The simplicity of that statement stayed with Ethan long after. For the rest of the day, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe Ryan's presence wasn't random at all. Maybe the universe had sent him as a reminder, to care, to feel, to notice again. Later that week, Mark confronted him again, his tone sharper this time. "You can't save every lost soul, Ethan. This one's different. You care too much." Ethan looked at him exhausted. "That's the problem, Mark. I stopped caring long before he showed up. And now I finally remember what it's like." Mark didn't respond. He turned away, leaving Ethan standing in the doorway with the echo of his own words. When the house grew quiet again, Ryan found Ethan sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. He sat beside him without asking. "I can leave if I'm causing trouble," Ryan said softly. Ethan shook his head. "It's not you. It's me trying to find meaning in a life that stopped feeling real." Ryan looked at him for a long moment. "You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes just being there is enough." The simplicity of that statement broke through Ethan's walls. He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "You're wiser than you look, you know that?" Ryan laughed quietly. "I've had to be." They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, the world painted in gold and gray. It wasn't romance. It wasn't rebellion. It was two lonely souls sharing silence, and somehow, that was enough. Ethan didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But as Ryan leaned back against the porch railing and the first stars began to appear, he felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. For the first time, the house didn't feel empty. The tension in the house grew quieter but heavier in the days that followed. Mark spoke less, and Ethan felt like every room echoed with the weight of words left unsaid. Ryan noticed the change. He didn't ask questions, but his glances said enough. He could feel the storm brewing. One evening, Mark came home early. Ryan was in the kitchen, packing a small sketchbook and some folded clothes. He looked up as Mark entered. The air between them was polite but strained. "Ethan's in the living room," Ryan said. Voice steady but soft. When Mark stepped in, Ethan was sitting by the window, reading the postcard Ryan had found in a drawer, a picture of a sunset from years ago, back when he and Mark used to travel. The sight seemed to remind them both of a time that now felt impossibly distant. Mark spoke first. "He's leaving, isn't he?" Ethan nodded. "He thinks it's for the best." Mark crossed his arms, his tone tight. "Maybe it is this. Whatever it is between you two, it's changed things." Ethan didn't look away. Maybe they needed to change. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Mark sighed, the anger fading into something quieter. "You found something with him that you lost with me." Ethan's reply was almost a whisper. "It wasn't love, Mark. It was a reminder. He made me see that I'd stopped trying, that I'd stopped feeling anything at all." Mark nodded slowly, his eyes tired. "Then maybe that's something we can start fixing." The conversation didn't end in resolution, but in understanding. Sometimes peace didn't come with apologies. It came with honesty. Later that night, Ryan stood by the door with his backpack. He smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Ethan said, voice low. "You helped me remember what it means to care. You showed me that kindness still matters." Ryan shifted awkwardly, then extended his hand. "Thank you for giving me a place to breathe again." Ethan hesitated before taking it, his grip firm but gentle. "Take care of yourself, Ryan. You deserve a better life than the one that brought you here." Ryan smiled, eyes bright with something like hope. "You do too." He walked out into the cool night, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. The door closed softly behind him, but the house didn't feel empty this time. It felt still, like the calm after a long storm. Weeks later, Ethan found an envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a small painting, a sunrise over a quiet street. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were 5 simple words, "You helped me see again." Ethan placed the painting on his desk beside a photo of him and Mark from better days. When Mark walked past, he paused, looking at it. Neither spoke, but for the first time in a long while, they shared a quiet smile. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something new. Softer, slower, more intentional. Ethan still thought of Ryan sometimes. Not with longing, but with gratitude. Some people come into your life to stay. Others just pass through long enough to remind you who you were always meant to be. And sometimes, that's all it takes to find the truth you didn't know you were searching for.